Welcome to this political forum this afternoon. On my left we have five energy spokespeople for five different political parties, and each is going to speak to you and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We have a couple of apologies. Jamie White has been unable to make it and he's been replaced by Robin Grieve from the ACT Party. I'll introduce each of the speakers with a brief bio before they speak. The order of speaking, I was going to go left to right, but Gareth didn't want to go first, so we've selected randomly. They all picked a number out of the hat, and this is genuinely a random order. The second apology is that Andrew Williams is not able to make it. Andrew, of course, is a representative of New Zealand First. But in Andrew's place, I just wanted to give you a message from New Zealand First. I'm quoting from the Otago Daily Times. Winston Peters homed in on power prices and the evils of the market in a speech to mainly elderly people in South Dunedin. This is earlier this year. The New Zealand First leader told a Grey Power public meeting at the South Dunedin Community Hall that staying warm was a necessity in Dunedin, but it was becoming increasingly unaffordable. He went on to say, the electricity and retail power sector in New Zealand has become utterly dysfunctional. Looking for logic in the New Zealand electricity sector is like looking for unicorns. There you are. There's a characterisation of our industry. Talking of our industry, he did go on to say, today the so-called electricity market exists only in the imagination of national ministers, aided and abetted by the hundreds of managers and consultants who now gorge on the revenues looted from the public by way of electricity prices. Did he miss anyone out? So it's my pleasure to take you through this afternoon. I'm the facilitator. I'm an energy consultant with SAPRE Research Group. I'm going to facilitate the session in this way. David Cagle will talk first. He is going to talk about the questions that he would expect a panel such as this to address. And David will also speak at the end, and he will draw some conclusions from what he's heard during the session. Each of the speakers will speak for 8 minutes, and after they have all spoken, they will have a right of reply. And that way, again, there's no order penalty. Then it'll be open to the floor to ask questions. Obviously, if we don't get questions, I have a few prepared earlier. And at 5 o'clock, the bar will open. We may finish earlier than that. So, before I call on David, I just want to have a word to the panel. If you look around this audience, it's full of engineers, lawyers, and economists, and it's a good representation of people that run the industry, both upstream and downstream. They're not the sort of folks that respond to superficial policies. They demand problem definition. Then they're interested in the policies, but they want to know the policy outcomes. And I'm sure at question time, if you're wanting in any of those departments, the questions will come thick and fast. So with that, with no further ado, I shall invite David Cagle to set out the sorts of questions he would expect the candidates to address.
Thanks, Toby. I'm conscious you haven't come to listen to me, so let me go straight to the questions. These are questions that have been supplied in advance to all of the panelists. We're conscious that energy is a very broad field, so what we thought we would try to do, we hope you find it useful, is to divide energy up into 5 subtopics. Firstly, in respect of minerals, we've asked the panel to consider the question, what is the role of crown minerals in the New Zealand economy, and how much encouragement will you give to exploration? What's your position on the role of fossil fuel-based energy use in the New Zealand economy? Then in relation to renewable energy, we thought it would be useful to ask the panellists to answer the question, what is your position on the decarbonising of New Zealand's energy sector, and what are the trade-offs you would make to reduce carbon emissions? What mechanisms do you think are the best to achieve this? In relation to competition, we've asked the questions, what monopoly problems or issues, if any, exist in the energy and specifically in the electricity sector, and how would you propose to address these while maintaining security of supply? In relation specifically to the retail pricing of electricity, we thought it would be interesting to get an answer to this question. What is your understanding of why retail prices have continued to rise in the face of static or falling demand and a supply overhang? Why will your policies result in delivered prices rising by the CPI or less? And finally, in relation to the ownership of state-owned enterprises, we posed the question, what advantages, if any, do the parties see in partial rather than full private ownership of SOE generator retailers? What changes, if any, do parties intend to make to the current mixed ownership of SOE generator retailers? So, the panellists are obviously not obliged to respond to any, let alone all of those questions, but that is the context that we've supplied. And perhaps at this point I might add just one thing to Tony's warning. I came across the comment recently in relation to politics. Somebody described some particular policies as resembling chicken soup. And I thought this was a very useful category for this afternoon. Chicken soup policies are those policies that might very well make us feel better, but contribute no discernible progress in relation to the patient, or in this case, the economy. So we are going to be this afternoon alert for chicken soup policies.
Thank you, David. We'll see you again shortly. I'd now like to call on David Shearer to address those questions. He will have 8 minutes. Just very briefly, David Shearer first entered Parliament in June 2009 after winning a by-election for the seat of Mount Albert. He was elected Labour leader on the 13th of December 2011. Following the leadership change of September 2013, David was appointed Shadow Spokesperson on Foreign Affairs and Energy and Resources, and I'll ask you to welcome him to the microphone.
Thank you, Toby, and it's good to see so many people that I've come across in the last few months here today. Good also to get number 1, actually. I don't seem to be able to manage that in the Labour Party, so it's nice to be able to get it here.
Give it time.
He's got confidence in that, Les. I've decided, obviously run through these questions, but in the order of my own choosing. So I'd like to start off on energy, just to say that ultimately what we believe is that fossil fuels are likely to be obsolete in the future. But the transition to renewable forms of energy is going to take many decades, and it's important that we manage that transition, both consciously and as we move forward as smoothly as possible. So let's start with electricity, and our policy on electricity has 3 key goals. 1, ensuring security of supply. 2, transition to renewable forms of energy, 90% by 2025 and 100% by about 2040, although that last 10% we recognise is going to be most difficult. And lastly, affordability, to be able to provide the cheapest power possible to our consumers. Right now we've got a cold snap, we're in the middle of winter, and people are obviously turning on their heaters to keep warm. Prices, according to the June quarter CPI, went up 4.2% in the last quarter. That's the highest quarterly increase, bar one, since the year 2000. And last week, we heard that residential demand for electricity had dropped by 7.1%. And the question really is, how can that possibly happen? If a market is truly competitive, why isn't it that we are actually seeing power prices going down rather than increasing decline? And most people in this room will tell you that, of course, the energy market is pretty competitive. The main reason that the power prices have gone up are actually because of the lines companies and Transpower. There's a lot of lines companies out there that I visited who would absolutely and utterly refute that. And Transpower, lines companies obviously regulated by the Commerce Commission, and Transpower very much under the control or under scrutiny about how much price they can go up. So in a sense, there's a gap there, a gap of credibility that I think many New Zealanders don't feel has been is sufficiently addressed. So are Kiwis getting a fair deal? And I don't believe that the market is as competitive as it should be. 93% of our power market is controlled by 5 biggest companies that both generate and sell. And if that's competitive, then a corner grocer opposite a big countdown on a street corner would be as competitive, where that grocer has to purchase their groceries from Countdown as well as sell groceries. That's the sort of analogy that we have at the moment in terms of retailers being able to get into new retailers being able to get into the retail space. In addition to that, we've got the power companies, and this as much as they're able to, are maximising their profits. 35% in profit of Genesis from 2010 to 2013. Contact 27%. Mighty River Power 19%. That's good profit on the back of falling power prices. And with SOEs now having been partially sold, only half of that profit in those state-owned company SOEs is now coming back to New Zealand. And that's the reason, and that was the trigger in many ways for us to announce our NZ Power policy. And we believe that our policy will be able to bring prices down. It will level the increases in prices into the future out, and we'll be taking the average price, buying electricity at the average price rather than the marginal. I will say that this is something that we have spent a lot of time on, a lot of work on. We've had it independently vetted by Burl. We believe that what we claim is therefore true because it's been done independently, but we're not going to be charging full steam ahead if we're in government on the 21st of January, pulling the lever and saying charge on regardless. This is something that we need to sit down and work through the details of as well, that we cannot do as an opposition. You have very limited resources as an opposition. So we'll be coming back to you on that. I'm not saying we'll change, but I definitely want to hear what you've got to say. Look, as in terms of our energy future, we need to be looking at a very different energy future than we have now, where increasingly and more and more decisions about electricity and energy use are in the hands of New Zealanders. So imagine yourself coming home in your electric car. You plug your car into the battery. That battery from your car feeds your own home, helping to reduce the peak electricity in the evenings. Solar panels are coming down in price as battery technology. That will be in your home as well. You connect to a battery to meet that peak demand in the early evening, and your appliances are programmed to come on later at night when tariff and demand is much lower. So the idea is to reduce peaks, reduce gas-fired electricity peaker plants that are both financially expensive and bump our electricity prices up, and are expensive in terms of our carbon emissions. We combine that with higher standards of buildings and building efficiency around the country. All rental houses will be obliged to be insulated and have an efficient heating source within 3 years. And we believe that will enable the energy demand that we have at the moment to continue to remain relatively flat. What we also expect is to have standards set for smart meters. We have the and I've said this before, the dumbest smart meters in the world because we didn't bother to regulate as Australia, the UK, most of the states in the US have done. So that the power companies get excellent information every 30 minutes, but consumers aren't able to have the immediate information that they're going to be needing to be able to make decisions, nor necessarily have that two-way flow of electricity, nor be able to program those smart appliances that are not around at the moment. We need transparency. We need to unbundle the various components of our electricity bill. We need to regulate our prepays so that it's unacceptable that 60% of New Zealanders end up paying more than a normal charge. On fossil fuels and the oil and gas sector, we believe that we should set best practice. We should be a lot like, in a sense, like Norway. We've got a number of areas that we need to move on. We're certainly not opposed to oil and gas prospecting and exploration. That is, as I say, an important part of our transition into the future. And we would like to see a much more upfront ability to issue block offers, where a lot of the consultation has already taken place up front rather than having companies having to wade through that later on. So there's more consultation, and at the same time, for those companies, there's more certainty. Very quickly on mining and minerals in general. Look, the Labour Party grew up in the mines, and as a result of that, we are very much of the opinion that we need to see a mining sector that is able to move forward, that is environmentally responsible, but that also provides good jobs for our young people to stop them going to Australia to mine as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I'd like now to call on Gareth Hughes. Gareth entered Parliament in 2010 as the youngest MP and is now the Greens musterer, that's whip, and is spokesperson for energy, mining, offshore, oceans, information communication technology, and libraries and archives. Gareth, if you could like to join us at the microphone.
Well, kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora, it's an absolute privilege to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I don't think we've ever had as many energy debates as we have had this election. So I think what it does highlight is the real choice New Zealanders face this election, perhaps the biggest choice Kiwis have had in 20 plus years. I think it's great that we're having that debate. It has been pretty muted for a number of years, so I really relish the opportunity to talk about my party's vision. And it can be summed up in 3 words. I've been singing it from the rooftops for the last 3 years. It's cleaner, cheaper, smarter. That's the Green Party vision for both electricity and other energy sources. So in this 8 minutes, I want to quickly go through David's questions through 2 sort of headlines. Firstly, through the electricity sector, and secondly, when we look at resources, so drilling and mining. So there's a lot happening in the sector at the moment. We've got flat demand, declining demand, ever escalating electricity prices. We see a quarter of New Zealand families currently in energy poverty, spending more than 10% of their income just to eat or heat, facing that tough choice. We're seeing Tiwai potentially close in 2017, the emergence of disruptive technologies like electric vehicles, more distributed generation sources such as solar, the penetration of smart meters, and I acknowledge David's point, not particularly smart meters, the rise of consumer power, the partial privatisation of the assets, and the questioning of the electricity market structure. So some fundamental questions, some big questions shaping the electricity sector, and I believe we are in a tremendous time of flux, because for 100 years the electricity model of pushing from large-scale sources out to customers only one direction is changing. What we're actually seeing is less thinking about electricity as a water pipe engineer. We're thinking about it more like computer science engineers. We really are on the cusp of an energy internet with all the opportunities for competition, greater retail services, and consumer demand. So I want to talk about our vision, which is cleaner, cheaper, smarter. So let's start with the cheaper, which is the high and rising prices. So under those electricity market reforms, which we've seen more than 113 tweaks according to the Mobi website, over the last 20 years. What we have seen is the 5th highest power price rises in the entire developed world. We've now got the 2nd highest industrial residential price gap in the developed world. What we're seeing is power prices go up more than 22% under national at a time when demand has been flat to negative. What we see is 42,000 people having their electricity cut off last year, up 4 times than 5 years ago. Likewise, as David pointed out, we've got 56,000 prepaid electricity customers, many of them struggling under high power prices. When I surveyed the prepaid price region, some are paying more than 40% more for prepaid than they are postpaid, with great difficulties of charging up. So what we see is a big burden on New Zealand households, and something I think Business New Zealand as a group should be cognizant of is the big cost to the economy. Now, I know we could debate the Wallach report till we're blue in the face, but what he found was that there was around 700 million per annum in excessive profits over a benchmark in a truly competitive environment. What I see and what I say is that looks like super profits to me, which is a tax being paid, a stealth tax being paid by Kiwi consumers, Kiwi households, and Kiwi businesses. This is damaging our national economic competitivity when we're seeing these high power prices essentially as a stealth tax through the economy. So David asked for a problem definition. What we're seeing is the rising, pervasive power price rises locked in every year. The question on do we have a monopoly? I don't think we have an electricity monopoly, but we do have an oligopoly, where those big 5 control 93% of the generation market, 95% of the retail market. We see very few new entrants, no major ones. What I want to see in the electricity sector is a more competitive market, putting pressure on prices, retail entrants coming into the market, offering new services, aggregating customers, incorporating those new technologies like solar and battery storage, the things we're not seeing in our market at the moment. So that's why we proposed NZ Power. Now, the big difference, of course, between the Labour and Green proposals, though we launched the proposals together, is we're not proposing to go to a regulation-first approach to pricing. We want to use the purchasing power, similar to a TY or Farmax situation, to negotiate with the power companies to drive down from that long-run marginal price more towards the average to ensure security of supply. And secondly, we also want to see progressive pricing, where the first block of power is priced more competitively than subsequent blocks, which does add a price on the margin to encourage people to not squander their electricity, to invest in efficient appliances. So, like David pointed out, it's absolutely crucial that we work with and consult with the sector. So if we're in a position to roll out the New Zealand power market reforms, what we will be doing is consulting with the sector, and be good to hear from the companies how they can envision working in such a model. So when we move to the second heading, which is smarter, we've got the rollout of these dumb smart meters, more for ease of checking meters than giving customers real choice. What I want to see is customers be able to turn on and off their appliances mobilely from their smartphone apps. I want to see customers have greater control, a fair price to be able to feed into an electricity grid. Because at the moment what we see is those customers exporting excess electricity, particularly from renewable sources, facing almost no certainty, only 30 days contract certainty and wildly varying prices. What I want to encourage is greater small-scale distributed generation. Because what we see is, when you survey the last 5 to 10 years, more than $100 million has been wasted on mega projects which couldn't get a consent through their communities or other various reasons. I'm thinking of things like Project Haze, Project Aqua. I believe if we encourage more small-scale sources, be it community-owned, medium-sized wind turbines, greater solar, which when you look across the ditch, they've got more than 1 million homes. In the US, every 4 minutes, a new business or household is going solar, and now it's creating more jobs than the entire coal industry over there. We need to start planning for a smarter electricity system, make sure we've got the right market conditions. We've got to start planning ahead for the electric car opportunity for New Zealand. Given we import $8 billion worth of oil a year, given we've got congested roads. 1 minute, I better race through. So cheaper, smarter, cleaner. What we want to see is 100% renewables by 2030 in an average hydrological year. We want to encourage greater small-scale source of generation through our solar homes and solar schools projects. We want to see a fair, non-subsidised feed-in tariff. Just quickly, when we look at the resources sector, our position's pretty clear when it comes to deep-sea drilling. It's a different kettle of fish to what we've been doing in Taranaki for 100 years, where our deepest producing well is only 125 metres. We would prohibit deep-sea oil drilling. However, I want to make it clear that we're not suggesting we're shutting down the domestic shallow or onshore oil industry. That has a role, but what we have to have is a transition strategy. When it comes to coal, we listen to the climate scientists who say that we've got to leave 70% of the proven reserves of fossil fuels in the ground if we want to give our kids a stable climate. As an economy that depends on a stable climate for our agriculture and other exports, I think it's important that New Zealand plays our fair share in the world. So what that means is working out existing mines, transitioning out of with our shallow and onshore drilling, but not opening up, not looking for the last drops of oil and risking the last Maori's dolphins. So cleaner, cheaper, smarter energy and a clean energy powered economy.
Very good. Our third speaker today is the Honourable Simon Bridges. Simon was elected to Parliament in 2008 and made Minister in April 2012. He again received promotion in January 2013 to the Cabinet table and took on the portfolios of Minister of Energy and Resources, Minister of Labour and Associate Minister for Climate Change Issues. I'd like you to welcome to the microphone, please.
Well, thanks, Toby. It's great to be here. And can I say really at the start, given that the National Party has been in government for 6 years, I'd be incredibly disappointed if you don't have a very strong sense of what our policy prescription is already. We want to, and believe we have for the last 6 years, provided a certain, stable, clear policy set of settings. And that's not to say that the sector will have always liked what we've done or that we're complacent. I think we've seen in terms of resources how we've significantly lifted the health and safety and environmental regimes where previously, certainly in the EEZ, there was nothing. And that we've also been very clear and over time lifted competition in the electricity sector. So our policy directions, I think, are very well signalled, and it's one of evolution, not revolution in this space, because I think we understand that bad policy decisions can literally destroy hundreds of millions of dollars of worth overnight. This year is my second year as Minister of Energy for the National Government, and if I can say I've given a series of speeches this year. We really have tried to lay out the big picture direction of the government in this area. And so, small advertorial, you can go on the Beehive website and see those if you like. But that big picture direction really is one that says New Zealand is part of a bigger world. We are, both as a country and as a set of countries, going to have to transition to a lower carbon economy as part of our future. We're realistic enough to understand that can't happen overnight though. And the IEA has estimated, I think quite rightly, that half of the world's energy needs are going to have to come until at least 2035 from fossil fuels. And so we are explicitly mixed and balanced in our approach. We do, of course, push in on hydro, geothermal. We're interested in solar, in bioenergy, but also oil and gas and minerals. And as an example of the abundance that we have, some of you may have noted, I thought very interestingly, in the latest energy report released last week, really the jump in estimates of gas reserves by 31% as a result of a drilling program over successive governments and estimates there. So we are blessed as a country, and we explore really to help the world as it transitions to a lower carbon set of economies. So in discussing renewables primarily, let me just talk briefly about electricity and then the wider energy picture. There's no doubt in electricity that it's a political football. That, though, in my view, masks the reality of one of the strongest systems or sectors, electricity sectors, in the world on the measures that matter. And I agree with David Shearer, really, perhaps about the measures that we should use, and that again the IEA talks about as a trilemma. That, you know, we're after here both a system that's secure, that's equitable, and that's sustainable. And we have a very strong record in each of those over the last 6 years that we would continue and enhance if given another 3 years. And sustainability, as I say, we're blessed with an abundance of natural resources. Since we've been in government, we've gone from 65% to 75% this year, renewables, fourth in the OECD, I'm sure actually probably in the world. We have a good spread away from just hydro. Wind has obviously increased to about 5-6% at the moment. Geothermal has doubled over 6 years, and indeed in the last 6 years, on market principles, we have supplied half of the world's new geothermal generation. And some of you in the room have been part of that, obviously with Te Mihi and Ngā Tamariki. And it could, of course, be said they were consented before National was government. But this government, I think, has certainly provided the certainty that wouldn't be there under some of the policy prescriptions we've already heard about. That geothermal's been crowding out thermal. We've seen that with Huntly shutting last year half of its coal generation. Again, I might add, all on market principles. We've got a 90% goal by 2025, and I believe we can meet that. Indeed, all currently consented generation is renewable, and there's significant quantities of it. In terms of security, we know we have a system now that is very secure, that has gone from a period of underinvestment to one that's required investment and has had it. I see transparent in the audience, of course, a significant investment there, but also in lines. And so we've gone really from a situation where every couple of years there were issues, there was talk of blackouts and rationing, to one where, look, in 2012, first half of that year, the driest 6 months on record ever in New Zealand's history. And certainly before I was Minister, I didn't know that, not a whimper. And in my view, that's really for two reasons. 2010 Brownlee reforms have worked. They have been a very strong factor in this area, but also in the competitive impulse that we have in the system now, but also that significant infrastructural investment. And then we come to the competitive aspect that is absolutely necessary to have equity in a system. The 2010 reforms established the Electricity Authority that is working hard to drive competition. And you know, if you think about it, we've seen with significant infrastructural investment flowing through in price. Gareth mentioned a 22% increase or thereabouts in price under this government. Well, that compares with the 70-odd% under the last government. We have half the price increases with all of that infrastructural investment. It's a picture now of much more retailers, brands, offerings, discounts, and big players being squeezed. That's not to say that more isn't needed, because it is. And so I think in summary, electricity has more renewables, more security, and more competition. And I also say I think the future's bright. And I think it's bright on the basis of actually government working with, and a word I think you used, Toby, in your notes to us, nudging along the energy market, whether that be with the Smart Grid Forum that continues to evolve and manage better technology through ECA, and some of the great work that is doing in renewables and the wider energy scene, or indeed internationally as we push our case in geothermal and other renewables, as well as oil and gas overseas. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Our fourth speaker will be less well known to you, so I'll give a slightly longer bio. Colin Craig is a respected businessman who's founded and run 5 successful businesses. He tells me that all of them have been consumers of electricity, and that he started his understanding of the industry as a large consumer. With a strong sense of justice and a desire to see his country succeed, it's no surprise that Colin became involved in politics, firstly with local business issues and then with leaky homes. In 2009, shocked by the government's refusal to be directed by the citizens-initiated referenda supported by over 87% of voters, Colin organised and funded the March for Democracy, seeking to require that our democratically elected government act democratically. In 2010, Colin became involved with looking at the proposed Auckland Super City merger. At the end of last year, Colin launched the Conservative Party. New Zealand, he subscribes to the philosophy that leadership is action, not position. If someone is a leader, they're out there serving other people, he says. And he's here to talk to you directly now. Welcome, Colin, to the microphone.
Yes, slightly out of date, that bio, because it was actually, a little less than 3 years ago that we kicked off the Conservative Party. And for those of you who follow the numbers, in 5 weeks we became the 5th highest polling party in the country, and in fact have more support than 4 of the parties in Parliament. But that's the interesting thing about systems. I was a little concerned about the introduction, because first of all we were told that you would analyse everything we said in the utmost detail, followed shortly by the fact that there was something to do with chicken soup, and I hadn't swatted that. And finally I was advised that I was not obliged to say anything, and I thought 8 minutes of silence could be a wee bit testing on me. So I thought, well, I'd have a bit of a shot at talking about things that actually matter to us all. While energy is not a platform that I've seen anybody out campaigning on, talking to the everyday New Zealander is nonetheless something that underpins whether or not we succeed as a nation. And that makes it a very important issue. It's also responsible for a lot of jobs in our economy. And if you are someone who thinks like I do, you actually think it's a key to the success of New Zealand in the future. Now, we were given some questions, some ideas of issues that we should cover, and I intend to address those simply because I understand that they've come from people in the room, and I think that it gives me a sense of what you want me to talk about. It sits really in 2 categories. First of all, minerals, fossil deposits. What should we be doing about those? I think I want to start by saying this, that a job working in that sector is worth about $333 an hour. Now, that's what we get in return for putting one person at work in that sector. So what do we make if we put someone in tourism for 1 hour? $60. $60. Now, there are some people whose vision for this country is that we should become a wonderful place that tourists visit. At $60 an hour, we're going to be a very, very poor country. The highest returning, best dollar that we can invest is in energy, in fossil fuels, and in the sector that provides not energy just for New Zealand, but also the world. Therefore, I think we need to look at this as something that's going to be fundamental to whether or not New Zealand is prosperous and whether we make it on the world stage. Now, I've just come back from the West Coast, where they loved me down there, and so it may be no surprise to hear what I am now going to say. We are highly supportive of greater exploration, of location, of identification, and of utilising New Zealand's natural resources. I believe that if we're a wealthy country, we will be able to do much better in securing a good environmental future for our children and our children's children. I think we will find it far harder if we are a poor nation. While I love to dream of electric cars and the wonders of a windmill outside every community barn, I think we need to be very, very honest about the world as it is now. It's driven by fossil fuels. I doubt there's any one of us who got here today without at least some contribution from fossil fuels. Maybe you rode your bike, but I wonder about the energy that powered the plant that made that bike. Even when we talk about food and agriculture, we know that we would never be able to sustain the level of production that we have either now or that's required in the future unless we're drawing upon fossil fuels. And in this aspect, New Zealand has an enormous competitive advantage. So the question is, will we use it or will we not? And I think we must answer that question with yes, we will. I thought I'd give you this little quote. It's something a scientist said to me, and I think it asks the right question. He said, coal is an energy-rich resource, a reservoir of prepackaged energy. How we choose to unpack that energy is a matter of our choosing. There exists a great opportunity for us to define a new, environmentally sound method of harnessing that stored energy. In doing so, we would not only become wealthy, but would meet, perhaps for the first time, our obligation to pass on to our offspring an environment in a better condition than that which we found it. I believe in technology. I believe it's smart to use that technology to leverage off the advantages that we already have. Creating jobs in this industry is to put our money in the area where we have our strength. It is to seek out the very highest return. Look at this industry. You've got, average wage, $105,000. Point me in the direction of other industries, apart from lawyers in the room, of course, where you can get that sort of return. We need to get smart and look and realise that it's a combination of technology and resources that will give us our best and greatest opportunity. Look briefly onto electricity, and I am involved in the electricity market. We manage properties. Thousands of people occupy those properties. We are involved in cogeneration activity. We're involved in customer networks. We're involved in negotiation over spot prices. We've had a lot to do with infrastructure. Can I just say this? We are dealing with a situation where we're coming from something and going to something. There was a time when we were underinvested in our network assets. There was a time when we were generating electricity by burning off the Maui gas field at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Those days are no longer with us. And that's harsh because we must face the reality that generation at 3 cents per kilowatt was only ever going to be a temporary situation. Going forward, what do we need to do? Well, first of all, I am comfortable that we do not need to revolutionise the market. We do not need to introduce some great government monopoly to buy power. Can we do better? We can. Do we need to make sure there's good controls? Yes. I see government having 3 roles to conclude, and this goes across both industries. I see government as a sensible regulator. Let's never have regulation that shuts down the ability to build generation. Let's change the regulation to ensure that microgeneration and other ways forward are an option. Secondly, government as a participant. I believe there's a role for government, particularly when you're talking about huge capital investment, which limits the number of people that can participate in the market. And thirdly, and I think importantly, government as a facilitator. If government doesn't help you succeed and grow, then we have missed an opportunity to take this country forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. And I apologise for not reading and noting the fact that that was incorrect, but I hope the sentiments in your bio were still correct, still relevant. Thank you. Our 5th speaker is Robin Grieve from the ACT Party. Robin has stepped in at the last minute. because Jamie White was unable to join us. So thank you very much, Robin, for making yourself available. Robin Grieve is an ACT Party board member, the Policy Committee Chairman, and is a candidate for the ACT in the Whangarei electorate. He is number 3 on the ACT Party list. Robin has been self-employed since the age of 22, running his own farming businesses until 7 years ago. He now owns and operates an avocado orchard in Whangarei and a Northland-based consultancy and training business. Robin subscribes to ACT values and principles, chief amongst them that it is the role of government to protect our rights, but not assume our responsibilities, and that we should all be allowed to pursue prosperity through liberty and choice. It's the growth in the state's interference with our freedoms, the loss of property right and the erosion of democracy and our judicial right that has prompted Robin to seek a high list placing for ACT at this election. I'd like you to welcome Robin to the microphone.
Thank you, Toby. I thought I'd sneak that little advertisement for ACT in the intro, save me doing it. But thank you, and I just apologise on behalf of Jamie White. He did want to be here. Unfortunately, we had a double booking, so I'm filling in for him. So you have me, which is good for me because I'm often teased about my lack of hair. But when it comes to filling in for Jamie White, I feel I'm quite over-endowed in that regard. But so ACT has an energy policy that we believe will make life better for people in New Zealand. And I've prepared something, but I firstly just should acknowledge that I've got a different set of questions given to me. So I received questions about the World Bank and other things, so I'm not sure what happened there, but Colin Craig has kindly, there was a previous draft, was it? Colin Craig has kindly given me his questions, very nice of him, but we're not going to give you Epsom.
We'll take it.
In terms of energy for us, the goal when you're setting policy is the bottom line. Well, the only factor really was that they must lead to the most reliable supply of the cheapest electricity and engineering and energy possible for people. Energy is the base from which the economy works, and if you can't get that at the lowest price, you will not get an increase in prosperity, and that's what drives us. If you look at the issues that we looked at that are problematic, they need to be addressed. One is that New Zealand is a very long, thin country and that infrastructure is very expensive. Well, we decided we're too small a party to do anything about that. Other problems, though, are the government involvement, lack of market forces in the electricity industry particularly, and the green tape, which suppresses investment. So when you believe, as ACT does, that a small, efficient government is better than a big, bloated and inefficient one, the natural place to look for solutions is to look at what the government's doing and look at what can be improved by the government not doing it. First one of those will be the emissions trading scheme. That'll be gone by lunchtime if we get enough seats. We do not believe in inflicting high energy costs on mothers trying to warm their children because of the irresponsible moral exhibitionism of the government. That sort of answers quite a few of those decarbonation questions, I think, that I've just been handed. The next thing we'll remove is the 90% target for renewable energy. New Zealand is blessed with renewable energy, and it's exciting what's happening out there in terms of renewable energy, but it baffles us that the government should have a policy on it. The next generator built must be the one that will provide the most reliable and cheapest supply of energy, electricity, where we want it. End of story. It is also baffling to us that policymakers should think that they know what will happen in the future in terms of the technological advancements of renewable and non-renewable energy. And to have, because basically to have such a target, what you're saying is that no matter how reliable, no matter how cheap non-renewable energy is, we won't use it. And that, in our opinion, is daft government. Third thing we'll do is sell the remaining generators, get the government out of the boardrooms of the generating companies. There's no more need for a government to own a generator as there is a supermarket, and anyone who can imagine what it'd be like going through a government-owned supermarket could probably appreciate the benefits of that. Now, other things that we do look at, because obviously we champion market We would champion freedom and choice for consumers in the market, which drives innovation, drives efficiency. And in the generating side and the retailing side of electricity, of course, we would think that's definitely the best answer. We're not 100% sure, we're not 100% happy entirely, but we defer to experts, industry experts, on the pricing model of the wholesale market as to how the bids are done and which bid is accepted. We'd like to look at that. We'd also like to look at possibly the reward available for emergency generators during times of crisis. We're not sure that there is enough reward there, and that might be suppressing investment in that area. In the area of transmission and distribution, of course, that's not quite so simple. To address the question of why electricity prices are going up when demand is going down and there's an overhang of supply, we'd have to say that two or three things would be involved there. Legacy issues, a transition of costs from the taxpayer to the consumer, the exhaustion of the Maori gas, cheap gas, and the fact that it's not a market. It's a highly regulated sector. And so the question is, do we choose or do we change from a regulated sector which can't reflect the market prices, but silly to expect a regulated sector to respond to market signals, or do we go for market? Now, ACT has no policy to reverse the status quo, but we're not averse to looking at it. Once we've doubled everybody's incomes through loss of taxation, made everyone equal under the law, including Susan Devoy, reduced burglary and cut green tape, we might look at separating the dispatch roles and the transmission roles of Transpower, which might precede a possible privatisation in the grid. Other helpful policies that we might look at, reforming the RMA, or we will definitely look at that, cutting that green and red tape. We're going to scrap the Environmental Efficiency and Conservation Act, abolishing the Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority. We don't think $40 million promoting energy efficiency is anything but an ultimate joke, really.
It's more than that.
Well, okay, ultimate joke. In terms of, it sort of says, and I'm sorry if it offends, but it sort of says that you must be efficient with your energy, even if it's not the best thing for your business. Because naturally, if it's the best thing for your business, the price will drive that efficiency. So being forced to do it, we're not in favour of that. There'll be no coal left in the hole under an ACT government, unless, of course, the market decides that. And technology is moving fast, and I really don't think that people give humankind enough credit. And I predict, and this is totally unscientific, I predict the energy resources, mineral resources, fossil fuels, all those sorts of things, I predict that they might be left stranded and become redundant, not because we run out of them, but because technology overpasses them. And so I think we need to reward technology, I suppose, or trust, sorry, I should say, in technology. We have hydrogen cell tractors. Thank you, Toby. We have hydrogen cell tractors now. We have prediction that the last fossil fuel car would be expected to be produced after 2070. Although, having said that, we have concerns about electric-powered cars, and that pricing signals need to be quite clear that these things can't continue to drive along the road free of charge, and they will need to face road user charges, and whether people buying a car are given that signal now when they're making that pricing decision. So just to make sure I've answered all these questions, which I've just finally been given, I think the Crown Minerals ones, yes, no coal will be left in the hole. The decarbonising one, is there any questions on that one? In terms of our policy, I'm not head in the sand, but our policy is that we do not believe that the costs of global warming are significant enough or certain enough to warrant putting pain on people. The monopoly situations, I think we've addressed that. We would finally look at Transpower and privatising some of the grid once we separate the dispatch role out of that, and look for better market signals in the pricing, possibly in the wholesale market area. And yes, selling the enterprises, that'll be done by afternoon tea. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panel members. You've all been very, very polite and helped me by sticking to time. I did say that everyone would have a right to reply, so no one was penalised by the order in which they spoke. And David Shearer is going to take that option up and David Shearer is going to stay seated. Can we just check that the microphone's working?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Oh, cool.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much. That's got to be the quote of the day. No coal left in the hole. So good luck, National. Well done. That's your. That flies in the face of what I thought was actually, to be honest, a pretty good presentation by Simon. And I think many of you might see the many similarities actually that exist in terms of our energy future. Our goal is 90% renewable by 2025. It's the same as Nationals. The Greens want to be 100% by 2030. But we have the same aspirations that in terms of moving towards a renewable energy, that's the way to go. We do have consented generation in abundance, and particularly in geothermal. The area that we don't agree on with National is in the area of competition, and Simon mentioned that power prices went up 70% under Labor. I want to address that because obviously there's a bit of a difference, and that's one of the differences is 3 years, 9 years rather than 6 years. But was also, as most of you will remember, there was also at that time where we had to take the cap off the price of Maui gas, and that pushed electricity prices up pretty considerably. We also put a massive amount of investment into infrastructure because of the blackouts of the 1990s, where there was a great deal of underinvestment. I'm not making excuses for that, but I do think we've got to keep that in perspective. And at the time, remember, the economy was growing at a much faster rate than it has done over the last 6 years. I don't buy the argument that we have a competitive market or sufficiently competitive market right now, and it was very interesting to read the COVAC report that came out as part of the Ministry of Business and Innovation the other day that said that the $15 million that was invested into the power switching capability really only generated benefits of anywhere between 15 and 65, they estimated, $1 million to those people who actually took that decision to change over. So while I'm emphasising the similarities, there's obviously some differences. One is in that area of competition. The other area is in terms of the safeguards that are around the oil and gas area, which I think the government has done some good work in this area, but I think it could be much better than it is at the moment in the area of in terms of the environmental safeguards that we can put in place, particularly in deep sea oil drilling and in exploration, and giving people, New Zealanders, the confidence that if we're going to go ahead with this, that those safeguards are in place.
Thank you very much, David. Gareth, would you like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the big differences people have heard from the panellists is around the resources sector.
Now, the Greens are pretty
clear. We want to orientate New Zealand to the future economy, to a clean energy economy. The big choice facing voters this election is Nationals' pro-oil, drill it, mine it, frack it approach to the economy, literally pouring tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money down these oil wells. Now, the deep sea wells, which is the ones we want to stop because of the risk, is so much greater with the shallow and onshore. It's clearly failed. We saw Petrobras leave, Apache, the fracking company, have left, Anadarko have drilled dry holes. This isn't a credible economic strategy. When you look around the world, what you see is in 2011, net international capital investment in renewables outstripped all the fossil fuels. The IEA is campaigning to end the $610 billion in fossil fuel subsidies, and it's time New Zealand caught up the rest of the world.
We can't keep giving $46 million in tax breaks to the oil industry, handing out seismic survey subsidies, hosting lavish, extravagant soirees for the oil industry, for want of a better word. So where the Greens are going to orientate us is to where China, where Europe, where America are looking for greater investment. They're crying out for clean energy technology, and the Greens, like the other parties, applaud the fact we're 75% renewables. This is our advantage. We should be leveraging this to grow a richer economy. So we listen to the likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers, who say there's a $7.5 to $22 billion annual economic opportunity in clean energy. You've got Export New Zealand saying we've got 150 clean tech export market by 2030 available to us if we have the right policy settings. This is the future. This is what the Greens are championing and advocating for. And what we know is there are 4 times more jobs in clean energy than fossil fuels. Sure, when you look in Taranaki, there's a handful of high-paid jobs, but the lowest job creation potential per percentage of GDP in the entire Taranaki economy. A handful of jobs, many of them offshore. What we see is 90+% of the profits flowing offshore, the 4th lowest tax plus royalty rate in the world. So we want to orientate ourselves to the clean energy future the world is crying out for. The markets are looking for services, intellectual property, the technology. We could be a lead in that position. That's why we've announced a climate tax cut, a carbon levy, not an emissions trading scheme, which only 6 people in the country understand and is easily gamed, to provide greater certainty for business, to reduce the tax burden on businesses. That's why we've announced plans for a green investment bank, similar to what David Cameron's done in the UK, or the Clean Energy Finance Corporation in Australia. So we've got an action plan to build a green, smart, innovative economy, and that's what we're asking for votes this election.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Minister, you've heard some fairly extreme views, some clear views. Is there a middle ground?
Party vote national. There's many things we could touch on. Just, for the lack of places to start, let's go with 2. Firstly, this comment that both David and Gareth have, that our smart meters are dumb, and the issues around that. Well, we've set up the Smart Grid Forum absolutely to guide the technology in this area, but we want it to be guided by technology driving the change, not regulation. And where you do it by regulation, which is what both the parties to my right, but in real terms left, want to go, sees you're stuck in a cul-de-sac with old technology that you can't change. We have very high penetration of smart meters in this country. And I think it's the view that we've got, again, on this side, is that somehow you put them in and then you've got to spend all this money, replace them. It's absolute nonsense. It's not where the company that do these smart meters are at. It's very simple to change and to move with the technology. And it's very clear, actually. Look at the UK. They regulated. As a result of that, they have minimal smart meter or advanced meter penetration. They will be many years away from doing this, and they have set themselves back by taking the kind of approach that the left want to here. You say this in a number of areas. Go solar in Germany, where the regulation of the technology and what they do has doubled their prices, and actually perversely to much more thermal being used in that country to smooth out the troughs in their power system. So I think we're absolutely on the right track. We've got the smart meters, we've got more advanced meters, and they can simply change. And I think that's a strong point there. I'll just say on the issues really that the Greens have, and David says, I work with ACT. I'd take ACT over Greens and Intent Mana any day, David, but that's another story. It is nonsense to say that we are not at world best practice when it comes to regulation. Actually, David Shearer says this as well. Well, he is not correct to say that. I've been to Norway, I've been to the US, I've been to Canada, I've met with the regulators, I've taken my regulators there to do it. And we, after that trip, an intensive study, trying to find best practice and see if there were things that changed, did not find anything we thought we needed to do better. And so I challenge the gentleman there to come up with things that they say actually we are not doing well enough here, because we are, and we put the companies that come here through the ringer. I just say to Gareth, it's a world that says, and David, if he's lucky enough to work with Gareth on this, where actually you say no to deep sea oil, you say no to fracking, and then you somehow still have a viable oil and gas industry. Well, I'm sorry you don't, actually, because you've just wiped out over half of it, and you've wrapped it in green tape, and it goes. And to say government's spending money on this is absolute nonsense. We spend $17.5 million on New Zealand petroleum and minerals, or we spend $70 million a year. That's why I corrected you, Robin, on your ECA figure, $70 million a year on ECA. And that's not to mention the much more that we spend actually on bioenergy to some of the companies in this room who are partners with us on that, on the stump to pump and these various other things. So we have a balanced approach to these things, but it's incorrect to say we throw money at this. Actually, for some work that's been done before my time at the Rugby World Cup, that green interests have had a bit of fun on, we had $1.3 billion of overseas investment spent in our waters in 2012, 1.5 billion last year. It's really significant money, private money being spent to explore our waters, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Colin?
Yeah, look, appreciate you saying how little the government spends. I think that's the problem here. If you look at it, I think we've done a lot in the Taranaki region, but that's only one of 18 regions where we are very oil and gas rich. Many of those haven't been explored. We don't know what we've got. And I see absolutely no problem of taking advantage of the world as it is now and making a ton of money for this country. It also supplies the jobs. It will give us the opportunity to finance ourselves into a position to take advantage of those wonderful new technologies when they arrive in some viable form. But I see no point in us as a nation giving up an opportunity to prosper and thrive. The fact of the matter is that that's a very good spend if we are to explore more, identify our resources, and I have no problem with government being a participant in the use of those resources. Indeed, Norway was mentioned. The Norwegian government decided it would get involved. It got involved in the oil industry over there, and that shareholding for the government, which holds it on behalf of the people, is now worth $480 billion. And guess what? We have more resources per person than they do. The opportunity is there, and I believe we must take advantage of that opportunity. That's the first thing. Look, the second thing that it comes back to whether or not we believe the government, and I think coupled to my far right here, which I agree is strange in the seating pattern, have got this idea of, the government should step in and become the buying agent for power, and somehow that might in fact do wonders for the industry, as if somehow the government might be able to negotiate better price than business people who are out there trying to get better prices all the time. I know many of those people, and I assure you that they negotiate just as hard or harder than any government agency would do. I don't believe that's the answer. I don't believe that taking the industry and somehow bringing in some significant change like that actually will deliver the best result. I'm not saying we can't improve what we do. I'm not saying that there aren't monopolistic tendencies amongst those participants in a market when there are relatively few players. Of course there are. But I just don't believe the answer is to essentially turn it upside down on its head and bring the government back in that role. Look, finally, government as a participant. I do believe government's got a big role to play, particularly in where we head, and I see no problem with government leading the charge and encouraging those who do. Our future lies in being willing to take the opportunities that we have. We have this opportunities. If one day down the track we're creating zillions of green jobs, and that's an economic reality, won't that be good? We will be able to finance it if we take advantage of the opportunities we have now.
Thank you, Colin. And Robin, you get the last.
Oh, I do.
Right,
Okay.
line.
I thought I had the last
You
say,
wanted?
actually, but
Well, there might have been new material.
well, I've ably refuted most of that already in my initial. I have a solar water heating at home, and this morning I had a lovely warm shower. Because you've got to have a mix of power, of supply and energy, and I think the interesting thing to me, I'm quite different here to. We don't want the government to take the charge in anything. We've got the 5 politicians and aspiring politicians up here, and out there in the industry is the market. And it's no point in up here people trying to tell the market what the market is or what the market should want. So whether the resource that's used should be the choice of the people. We believe if people believe in a decarbonised world, they can live in a decarbonised world because they can have their solar water power and those sorts of things. So that's where we want to leave it, really, with the individual choice. The government, of course, has the role, and we do applaud what National's done in terms of standing up, in terms to some of the pressure they faced. I remember the old Beverly Hillbillies and Jed Clampett shooting that rabbit, remember? Is anyone else old enough to remember that? And riches befell him because he shot this rabbit and got oil. Well, imagine if you did that here. You'd be villainised. And
rabbits have rights too.
Yes. So riches should be exploited. It's our responsibility to bring the best for our country using the resources that we have, and those resources will change. I never think we should worry about the resources running out. If you look through history, resources are used, depleted, technology changes, advanced. Yes, there's lots of stuff happening in the terms of renewable, and I think in terms of microgeneration, so in other words, houses generating their own electricity, removing the requirement for transmission and those sorts of things. That's all very exciting, and that can all be market-led, and that'll be the best place for it to come from.
Thank you very much. Now, audience, it's your turn. If you'd like to ask a question, please state your name and who you represent. And you've heard what the panel have to say. Who'd like to ask a question? I cannot believe it. We have a gentleman over here. Thank you.
Bernie's voting act now.
So, and can you give us your name?
Excuse me. Hi, Bernie Napperwick for Straterra. On the topic of coal, which is a complex one, Gareth, you know that hothouses, food processing, hospitals and schools, and a range of industries, including cement, steel, at the moment rely on coal, and a lot of it's New Zealand coal, and a lot of it is different blends of New Zealand coal that come from a wide range of mines. And I mean, we're puzzled at how, if with your policy of stopping new mines, all that'll happen at least in the short and medium term is that New Zealand will import coal, and how does that stand with your party's policies?
Well, thanks for the question, Bernie. I mean, I'll give Simon a pat on the back. The ECA is doing good work, trying to help schools and factories and businesses refit their boilers with, say, wood chips or other wood pellets. I think that's what we want to see, because that's carbon neutral, that's providing more jobs, and it's a great sustainable way we can have that industry going forward. Now, like I said in my presentation, I'm sure Straterra is not going to like our policy, but our policy is grounded in the science, what the experts say, which is we can't afford to burn all the fossil fuels we've proved. So what we're doing is putting in place policies to make sure our kids and their kids can grow up in a stable climate, so our agricultural economy can benefit from a stable climate. So I'm well aware of the challenges facing the New Zealand economy to wean itself off coal, but also I'm quite happy not to be advocating for an expansion of the coal industry, because as you can see on the West Coast, there's all the challenges of the boom and bust cycle you see there, hundreds of workers being laid off because of New Zealand trying to play a role being a raw commodity exporter on the world stage, and we're seeing it with the logs, we're seeing it with the milk powder. My vision for richer New Zealand is a more diversified economy that's looking to the future, not to the past, that's looking to things like clean energy. And ultimately, Bernie, you've got to acknowledge there's a limit to the amount of coal we can export. There's no limit to the amount of software, intellectual property, technology, ideas that we could be exporting, and that's what I'm trying to promote.
I just want to say I'm indebted to Gareth for saying that ECA's doing good work. And I just want to know, Gareth, why you only put mean press releases out about me and you didn't put one out when we did that stuff. But it is true, and we've got some, I think, really exciting kind of stepping stones in that area in relation to advice and consultancy to see dairy and meat plants switch off coal and move over time through their boilers and so on to bioenergy, and another renewable heat hub in Southland that, if it goes well, who knows, may be something that can be expanded. But to pick up on David Cagle's comment about chicken soup, to say that we can switch from coal overnight, either in New Zealand or in the world, is chicken soup policy. Because the fact of the matter is, in the South Island, whilst the North Island can run on gas, for industry, South Island needs coal, and there isn't a viable alternative today. And that's what our dairy and our meat and our schools and our hospitals need to keep those people warm. And I find it hard, to say, to argue for coal in an aggressive way, because I think you make very strong arguments for oil and gas exploration. Coal is harder, but we still need it right now, and we're going to for the foreseeable future. And I also make the point, in a world where China and India and a number of other countries need that coal to literally have the energy to keep their people warm, it's very difficult for us, I think, to be judgmental about that. Actually, we can help, I think, by doing things well in this country when it comes to our oil and gas and helping them transition off that more carbon-intensive energy form.
Thank you. Now, audience, I did talk you up earlier on to say that you would have lots of questions, insightful questions, and we do have a question here, but just keep thinking about the questions you might ask. Down the front here.
Yeah, just a question. We used to have an annual winter power crisis every year. Every year we'd be told we had to have a cold shower and go to work smelly. Why do you think that doesn't occur anymore, and why do you think we no longer have to have those sort of savings campaigns?
Well, we used to have that in the 1990s, as you remember, Tim, when that was the case. We made massive amounts of investment over the 2000s, and that's continued on. And I acknowledge that there's been upgrades, obviously, to Transpower and further than that now. But in the last 4 or 5, 6 years, we've actually had a decrease in the demand. And I think over probably the foreseeable future, given the uncertainties around TY and what's happening, we've got consented abilities to build more over the next little while. But if you're targeting or you're looking at the issue of NZ Power and how that would shape up, I mean, we're obviously very aware of the fact that security of supply is the most important issue that we have to face. But we can do that in a number of different ways, and it doesn't have to be independent power or energy companies building their own new power station, for example. We can do it in other ways of investing more in insulation, investing more in enabling people to install solar heating and solar energy on their roofs, solar panels on their roofs with batteries. That's the opportunity we have at the moment, and I don't see a lot of that innovation happening at the moment. I see it happening with Vector and in companies like that, but I don't see it happening in our major power companies in terms of distributed power generation as opposed to very centralised ones.
Would anyone else like to have a go at that?
Yeah, look, I think that, first of all, that points to the fact that we have had that infrastructural investment. I perhaps disagree a little with what David said there. At the grassroots level, if you're talking businesses and industry, they are being innovative. Cogeneration's a big thing for a lot of businesses. Energy planning has become a big thing. I think that's all very positive, and that's actually the consumers taking, and for some very large consumers, taking a very proactive and sensible role in minimising how much energy they use, because we all know that it's much more efficient to decrease power requirements than it is to build new generation. However, if a sensible thinking business wants to build new generation and they believe that it's economically viable to do so, good on them. I don't see why we should stand in the way. That will only help with security of supply. But the reality is it is far better than it used to be, and I think that that's partly why we have seen increased cost, because we have ultimately seen an improvement in the product and the service that's delivered. And that's just how economics works. It's how a market works. It may not be perfect, but we're paying more for a better service and a better quality of delivery overall, and actually that's why that dynamic is like that. But I think we have seen innovation at the local level. A lot of businesses, a lot of people that I know have invested wisely. They know when the peaks are. they're planning very carefully, and I think that message has got out there, and it's still going on. I mean, most big buildings that we look after, for example, have electricity reviews. They're looking at how do we save energy. I could go through a myriad of little solutions they use, but suffice to say, I think the right signal is getting through to large consumers, and they are making some pretty good decisions. So I just think a pat on the back, because that is happening. It's what you want to happen, and it actually is.
Signals getting through to consumers. Who would have thought?
Can I just jump in with brief comments? I mean, I think so. The infrastructure point in this has been well addressed. You know, billions of dollars being spent both by Transpower and the lines companies. Of course, there's also very clear part of the Brownie reforms, the law changes. I mean, power companies do have to compensate consumers in the event that they start rationing supply, and that has to have had, I think, a sobering or a salutary effect on the businesses. I think I'd also just make a related point, which goes to David's, in my view, wrong point that, well, you've got demand flat, but prices have gone up. How can this be? Well, of course it can be, and it's right to be, when transmission and lines have invested in a very significant way. They're highly regulated. I think some in the lines game would say too regulated, but it's the way it has to be to impose quasi-competitive imperatives on them. Those investments only come through when that infrastructure is commissioned, and so it's right that we see that coming through in the power prices. But of course, the competitive part of the economy this year has been flat and has now started to fall, and that is exactly what you would expect to see in a system, in a market-operated system that's working properly.
I just think it's an example of this blame game we've seen in the sector, where the gentailers are blaming the lines companies, they're blaming someone else, the minister's blaming someone else. No one's stepping up and taking responsibility or actually explaining to Kiwi consumers. And as David with his members' bill points out, they can't even understand what's happening when they look at their power bill. When you look at financial year 2013 to 14, only 31% of the increase was lines and transmission. So 69% was the energy component and the other parts of the bill. So consumers are baffled what's going on. But to answer your question, Tim, I mean, what we're seeing is a more diversified generation portfolio. We were a lot more hydro dependent, say 20 years ago, 15 years ago, a lot more wind, geothermal. What we're seeing is the peak change in various regions. So down in Canterbury with the irrigation schemes, you're seeing more of a summer peak than that winter 5-6 p.m. peak, and more efficient appliances. Very proud that my party was able to work with Simon's party. We've insulated 300,000 homes. We haven't finished. That's why we need to keep going and supporting Kiwis to insulate their homes. But a variety of factors has meant our electricity is more secure, which is a good thing for our national economy.
Mark Linds from Meridian Energy. Just a few comments around power price increases, and Mr. Shearer, I'm in your camp. It's very hard to follow the statistics. They get presented in all different ways, but I did see some numbers last week that I think the EA is actually publishing tomorrow, which analyses public data that MB have put out. It shows over the last 3 years the retailers' price increases for energy has actually been 0.5% per annum, which all of us know is below inflation. And the story around infrastructure with Transpower and the lines companies quite clear, and I think their increase was something like 6%. So just put that on the table to provide a little bit of context about all the discussion about power price increases.
And let's remember, of course, though, that the transmission and distribution is regulated, and so I think it's whilst I can understand that consumers don't appreciate it, it is a highly regulated sector, and they're passing through costs that they've incurred. But you're absolutely right. The competitive part is now going down.
But without wanting to disagree with the figures, because I haven't seen them, but I guess the only response to that is to say, well, look, most consumers out there that I speak to when I go around the country, and I bet it's the same with everybody here, will talk about their power bills going up, and they're not sure where it's coming from, but they're still thinking. And if you think that New Zealanders are not don't think that, then you need to get out a bit more and sort of see that they do, because they really do. The issue, I mean, there was, I went and saw, I'm going to take I don't know if there's been very many lines companies. I looked through the guest list here, but I'm not sure if there's many lines companies here today. But I was in it seeing Vector the other day. Last year, the Commerce Commission released their report, said they had to drop their increases by 10%. Well, that didn't roll through the energy sector and didn't drop prices that the consumer had to pay. So there's something wrong with the system where a lines company has to reduce their lines charges by 10%, and it doesn't, or 9% or whatever it was, and it doesn't, and then that doesn't flow through the system. It gets soaked up by the retailer. Now, I know that some retailers didn't do that, and I think you might have been one of them, Mark, but there were certainly others who did. What? Didn't. I think you made the point to me. I take your word for it that you didn't pass those. You actually didn't pass those on, but some did. So there is something there is something wrong with what's happening.
I think also what we could say is I'm willing to predict there'd be consensus on this panel amongst the political parties, albeit actually not necessarily amongst the audience, that there does need to be greater transparency in the billing process. So you should know, I think, whatever parties form the next government, it's coming your way. And that's right. I mean, from my perspective, the Electricity Authority has a considered process that they're working through, and I happen to think, I think they're still going through the work on this later this year, but I happen to think that the end, or the result that they're at so far, where you don't have everything itemised every bill, but where there are changes you do itemise so that people can see which part is responsible for the change, be it good or ill, is right. And as I say, I'm willing to predict there'd be no one on this panel who would disagree with that.
Oh, no, I don't necessarily disagree, but it's interesting. I'm nice to hear about consumers, because that's where what should be driving it. But I think one of the issues, I look at this question from Mr. Cagle here, and it says, what's your understanding of why retail prices are going up? And these are the points that have been addressed here. And I don't really think that there should be it should be known. What I would take issue with is that people are misinformed in order for political parties to sell policy, in terms of we accept and act. I mean, while we don't like regulation, we sort of see regulation as a bad thing. Good regulation is a very good thing, and it's essential at the moment. That's our policy position on the transmission and the distribution sector. So I think trying to say that the market has failed, or we heard from Mr. Williams and that before we started that it's talking about market where there is no market. I think if people understood that it is not a market, that's the price we pay for certainty of supply, and until someone can come up with a better model, like a market model, and we're open to that, but it would be industry-led, not government-led.
Yeah, I probably want to jump in and just defend some of those electricity retailers. I deal with them. I actually think there is a reasonable level of transparency, but customers don't necessarily take advantage of that. Retailers do advise why there are price rises. They advise what components there are within the bills, as they have to do. My experience, and remember I deal with thousands of consumers, my experience is this, that the vast majority of them actually aren't that motivated to find out. They could do. It's normally detailed online on websites. There are some power companies that break it down, and you can go online and find out every detail and buy 4 power contracts. Most people don't bother. And so, look, my view is, sure, we wouldn't mind greater transparency, but for the majority of consumers, they're actually just accepting of the fact they don't want to know.
Perhaps I can provide a bit of insight into power price changes recently. And it's reasonably simple. It's not brain surgery or rocket science or anything like that. It's just to point you where in, I suppose, the evolution of building networks and grids. Alison's team's finished some good work on the transmission network. There's about 3.4 billion that's gone on the last 3 years. It comes a time when that's going to get passed through to consumers, and that's what we do as our job. We pass it on to the consumers who connect to Wellington Electricity's network, and other CEOs around the country are doing the same. The other half of price increases come straight from regulation. So the Commerce Commission make sure that our price is kept in check. There's 5-year reviews. We're going through one now for 1 April next year. And out of that, prices will get reset down, or there'll be gains that can be made because simply price haven't recovered the economic costs that we have to run with. So those things are all in play. I think where I started talking about timing, Mark's guys are seeing the fact that, you know, the volumes are dropping. On our networks, we're seeing demand is still staying up, so there's sufficiency going on at certain times, which is great. And so they're at a place where supply-demand balance will come to swing, and there won't be a lot of opportunity to increase price because costs are driving in the retail wholesale sector. So for us, we're seeing the opposite. We're having to invest in our grids, and Alison's done her part. You'll see lines companies having to do their part, but albeit through putting those costs in front of the regulator for them to actually agree that this is warranted or this isn't. And I'll finish with the question that Toby invited me to ask. Brings me to the point of resilience. We all want secure supply of electricity. I think all of the speakers today recognise that. It really comes down to which generation should be paying for that resilience investment, because that's a key thing, particularly sitting in a very earthquake reinforced building, which is fantastic. Not all of us get to share that, but is it this generation that should pay for the added cost of shoring up these assets, or should we spend that over the next few generations? It's a question we've been grappling with.
Right, panel, this is the last question of the day before we turn to David Cagle. So if any of you would like to...
Could you? It's just a bit subtle, to be honest,
could
about
you explain
politicians.
yourself a little
I mean, I think
Greg,
I kind of
too
get...
subtle.
Why don't you tell us what you really mean?
I understood the question.
What do you feel like you're paying for that you don't want to?
Hey, I understood the question. I'll go first, shall I?
Perhaps I can make it simpler. I own 400 buildings in Wellington. 320 of those are built before 1976.
Is that an energy question?
No, that's an infrastructure question.
Yeah.
And we're going to reinforce some of that infrastructure. Do we pass the cost on now and put the price up for doing that work, or do we drip feed it across 3 more generations?
Yeah, I mean, I can give it a go. I mean, it's a balance. You've got to look at what your current cash flow is like, what your debt ratios are like, and how much extra debt you can put on, and the return on the cost of capital. But I think one of the big questions, facing particularly the lines and transmission networks, is as the price of solar drops, and I know installs have increased 290% in the last 2 years. Other utilities around the world are really questioning this death cycle, they're calling it, which is a negative feedback loop as more people escape rising retail electricity prices. They go solar or batteries and get off the grid, which means there are less people on the grid paying for that expensive infrastructure, again driving people to drop off the grid. Now, my opinion is that we should be using the grid as a essential large battery for the entire country. What I don't want to see is lots of homes and businesses going off grid using batteries. We should be using our hydro potential, which is fast and easily dispatched as a national battery. So in terms of resiliency, I definitely do support small scale distributed generation, because it reduces the waste of the transmission and lines losses. It's spread out, benefits everyone. People have a stake in it, so I think consenting issues are more easily addressed. But ultimately, we need to do it in a balanced way, which protects the national grid, the national battery.
Hold on, I'm jumping in here because that was a chicken soup answer.
What
it was?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, amortise it over time, spread it over time. It is the appropriate way to run the network. I know you probably already do exactly that, as is required. That is the right approach. And you can do it no other way. You can't pay for it up front, and you can't leave for it to be paid tomorrow. That's just the realities of running network business.
And I just want to add a footnote. I didn't disagree in the first part of Gareth's answer with anything he said about solar, but I cannot for the life of me fathom why government would spend many millions of dollars putting solar on schools when today it is uneconomic and it doesn't even have an environmental benefit. That is the ultimate chicken soup politics that the Greens are playing.
Well, these schools are paying thousands of dollars in expensive retail electricity. Some of them are paying more than 35 cents per kilowatt hour. What we heard from the principals is they would rather be spending thousands of dollars on their kids for literacy programs, for playgrounds, not for electricity. So if they can generate their own electricity through a capital grant through the government, They're absolutely over the
Capital
moon that
grant
we've
from the
made this.
government that costs more and means less being spent in schools on education.
Just give the schools the money for the books and forget the solar.
Anyhow,
On that note,
it was going so well. Could we transition from chicken soup to gin and tonic?
the transition is about to come. David Cagle, if you'd like to come and tell us what you made of your challenge, and after that we'll hear from Rob Whitney to close the session for the day.
Okay, I'm very conscious that I'm standing between people and their gin and tonic, and the chance to chat about what we've heard this afternoon. If nothing else, I think we've established that this is a very broad topic, and there are many aspects that I think still need to be teased out. I was delighted in that respect, David, if I might say so, that there's room for consultation about some of the details of your key policy. That's really good to hear. Just a couple of quick examples that struck me of things that are fine, at least in terms of how they sound as far as they go, but raise other questions that we're going to be keen to pursue as time goes by. Feed-in tariffs, Gareth. Yep, I understand the idea, but those two words raise a whole lot of details. That's not a criticism, I'm just commenting. And reforming the RMA, often been promised, could mean a great variety of things, just depending on what the content is. So we'll await the details. There was obviously a lot of debate today, and we all came along expecting it, about prices and competition. So here's just a thumbnail sketch from me as to how I think some of this debate went. Colin made the fair point that prices have gone up in recent years because we're transitioning from cheap gas, which must be true, although it did start quite a while ago. And the minister's added, and others have echoed this, that in more recent times, there's been considerable investment in the transmission sector, actually, and for that matter, in new generation. You would expect the most recent generation to be slightly more expensive than the generation that came before. Otherwise, it would have already been built. Otherwise, the order would have been different. The problem with those explanations, valid though they are, is that they really don't explain the significant mystery here, which is why residential prices have gone up so much more than industrial prices. The factors that I've just identified don't explain that distinction. I think that there is an area here that deserves to be probed more in the remainder of the campaign. Turning then to remedies that might be offered in relation to whatever the competition issues really are, David Shearer began by rightly pointing out that there are only 5 companies in the electricity sector who together provide and have 93% of the market. The problem, I suggest with great respect, with that statistic, is it's perfectly accurate, but if you think about a lot of New Zealand markets, actually that's a lot more competition than we often have. We're a small country. That's more competition than exists in the building supplies market, a not unimportant market in this country. It's more competition than exists in respect of supermarkets. To go to another market you mentioned yourself, and not an unimportant one. It's actually about the same measure of competition at a generation level as I understand exists in the United Kingdom. So, it might or might not be a serious problem, but I think that is a question in itself. The question of whether treating it as a problem, moving to a system of centralised purchasing is the right answer, well, let's just say I think that question still sits out there. The policy, there was a brief reference to some of the theoretical background to this policy proposal. Gareth, you reminded us of the Wallach report. In an interesting way, I thought, with a wave of the hand, I don't mean this unkindly, as though we're all familiar with it and there's been a lot of debate, which is true. Yes, we are familiar with it. Yes, there has been a lot of debate, but I would suggest a debate which is, as even now, unresolved. If policy is going to be founded on that report, then the criticisms that have been made of it need to be addressed. And in particular, we can't go on citing figures like $700 million super profits a year and attribute that to Wolack when Professor Wolack himself has repudiated that figure and rightly said that wasn't his calculation. It was done by the Commerce Commission based on his methodology, but not a figure that he accepts. Okay, the real question here is, if we have a disparity between industrial prices and retail prices, if we are concerned with rising retail prices, how will centralised wholesale purchasing actually help? Centralised wholesale purchasing doesn't change the level that's sold, that is to say the level that's demanded, nor the costs of supply. It might change the price that the government's prepared to pay, but it doesn't change the underlying costs of supply. I was looking tonight for policies that would address either demand or the cost of supply, and I heard some, and that's good. But to the extent that parties are offering policies which would address the amount demanded or the costs of supply, they could be doing those anyway. It's not clear that centralised purchasing makes a significant difference, or to put it another way, it's not clear that this is the right answer to the right problem. I'm belabouring that a little because, and I think deservedly, because I think this is the most novel and also the most radical policy on offer in this field, and therefore I think it deserves a lot of attention. By contrast, we had very little discussion this afternoon, it seemed to me, about the most radical policy change we've seen in the last 3 years, the partial privatisation of SOEs. We floated, I hope you all saw the cunning plan here, we floated a question to the panellists, all of which they ignored, which was essentially, if privatisation is the right answer, then why is partial privatisation the appropriate balance to strike? I'm still puzzling over that one. We'll leave it pass for people to reflect on. We had relatively little discussion today about security of supply, which is interesting in itself, not necessarily poor judgment on behalf of the panellists, but some of them may be aware, because we did float this as an earlier potential question, that the World Bank, in its, I think, quite important ease of doing business survey, which is an international survey updated every year, in which New Zealand ranks third overall in the world, behind only Hong Kong and Singapore in terms of the ease of doing business in this country. That's pretty good. Except we rank 45th at the moment in a category called getting electricity. Not quite clear what getting means, but presumably not particularly price. Presumably this is how people outside, and I strongly suspect people inside this country, think about security of supply issues. The interesting questions to me are, is that ranking fair? And fair or not, is anybody interested in doing anything about it, because it potentially affects the world's perception about New Zealand as an investment destination? So there's some questions to reflect on in the remainder of the campaign. Lastly, it struck me that the topic where there is the greatest range of views between the parties is in relation to the need, and if there be a need, the way in which we ought to transition away from carbon. Minister, fairly enough, says, well, we're 75% renewable already, so we're not doing too badly. Except, Minister, that's of course the electricity figure, which...
I only had 8 minutes.
Indeed. No.
What is this?
No. Please understand, I'm not trying to beat up on people. I've been where you are. I know how difficult it is. No, I'm genuinely simply flagging questions that I think we ought all, candidates and punters, to reflect on as time goes by. Really the point I'm making is, yes, we are doing well in terms of, because of what nature's given us to start with, but never mind, we're doing well in terms of the renewability of our electricity sector. So the challenge remains in the rest of the energy sector, and in particular in relation to transport fuels. But here's the interesting thing. There is a significant disagreement between the parties, that's not a bad thing in itself, as to whether these facts matter. Colin, you say it is easier to address the environment if a country is wealthier. Of course that must be true, and it's an important point, but I'm left wondering whether the Conservative Party does support a transition from fossil fuels, or just a smaller transition perhaps than other parties. Robin, I apologise because I didn't quite get the phraseology, but you had a marvellous phrase which was something like the government's irresponsible moral posturing. It wasn't quite that, but you'll know. Exhibitionism. Very good. And I'm thinking, you made that in relation to the emissions trading scheme, I think, but actually much of our criminal law is there in order to set a standard knowing full well that many people will fail to meet it. With great respect, I think there is a place, even though ACT might not think it's as large a place as I might, I think there is a place for the government setting down a moral position. Perhaps it's not in this subject, or perhaps it is. I am going to save my own personal chicken soup award. Remember, chicken soup is the policy that makes you feel good, but doesn't actually contribute anything to your recovery. I'm going to award my own personal chicken soup gong to the person who said the cost of global warming is not significant enough to warrant inflicting pain on people. And the reason for that is because that, with respect, suggests that we can afford to do nothing when the consensus plainly is that we can't. Now, the consensus could be wrong, but I don't suggest it can be ignored quite as blithely as that statement suggests. So, thank you for the opportunity to share those thoughts. I want to finish in this way. I actually think it is a marvellous thing that we can have 5 panellists here. We can assemble for a couple of hours. We can consider in good humour and good spirit a really important topic, and nobody's at risk of physical injury. The greatest thing that we risk probably is our safety as we drive home. In a large part of the world, that is not true, and that's something to celebrate. Thank you.
Rob, if you would like to come up and close.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Rob Whitney. I'm chairman of the Business New Zealand Energy Council, and my day job is as Chief Science Advisor to CIL Energy, an independent research organisation working in the energy sector. So I'm sort of quite interested in a number of the solutions, and I'm quite happy to talk about zero emissions from coal and producing hydrogen and the wonderful things we can do with smart grids. But I'd like to thank you today on behalf of the Business Energy Council for your presentation. So to David Shearer, Gareth Hughes, Simon Bridges, Colin Craig and Robin Grieve, thank you for your presentations. I'd also like to thank David Cagle for bringing it all together, and Toby Stevenson for the job you've done in mediating the discussion. Back to Business New Zealand Energy Council is, as you know, the New Zealand member of the World Energy Council. And the World Energy Council has been highlighting for a number of years the concept that we need to recognise the energy trilemma. And if it's good to see it has been recognised by several of the speakers today, perhaps not properly attributed to the World Energy Council. And I noticed Gareth has switched smart for secure for smart. Or if we're smart, our energy will be secure. Why this trilemma? Basically, secure energy is critical to fueling economic growth and prosperity for the country. Energy has got to be accessible and secure at all levels of society to ensure we get social stability. And the impact of energy production
and energy use on the environment needs to be minimised in order to combat climate change, to look after water, and to make sure we husband our resources properly. One of the things is that if you ignore either of these three aspects of the trilemma, you get problems. You get out of balance, and you get a reaction to that, to ignoring that, and you can look at lots of examples of that. I think a recent one has come in the UK, where the opposition party said, when we get into government, we will put a price freeze on retail electricity. The World Energy Council, Christoph Frey, when he was here in March, noted that that was the biggest single step back in energy security in the UK over a generation, because people suddenly started, because there was going to be a price freeze on electricity, stopping looking at new generation options. Now, each year the WEC ranks countries for their performance in terms of the energy trilemma. New Zealand ranks 8th, and that's pretty good, and all the other countries are Scandinavian or European countries above us. So it's a pretty good position, but we can't rest on our laurels. I guess from what we're wanting from the Business New Zealand Energy Council is to look at how the policies and forward thinking you have on energy positions us in terms of our trilemma ranking. We don't want that to drop off. We want to see policies and practices which will address all aspects of the trilemma and raise our energy ranking on this annual rating higher than 8th that we are at the moment. So thank you very much for all of that. And a final thanks to Chapman Tripp today for hosting not only the venue here, it's a great venue, but also looking after the drinks and things afterwards. So thank you very much to Chapman Tripp as well. Thank you.